Amber's vision blurred as the mansion floor rushed toward her face. 15 hours of scrubbing marble without food had finally broken her body. But before darkness consumed her completely, strong arms caught her mid-fall, and when she opened her eyes, the billionaire standing over her wore an expression she'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered rage. Not at her. At someone else. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. The grandfather clock in the East Corridor struck midnight with a hollow, mocking chime that echoed through the Thornton estate like a death knell. Amber Martinez pressed her forehead against the cool marble pillar, willing her vision to stop swimming, willing her legs to hold her upright for just one more hour. Just one more room. Just one more impossible task before she could collapse into the servants' quarters and steal 3 hours of sleep before the nightmare began again. Her hands, raw, cracked, bleeding at the knuckles, trembled as she wrung out the cleaning cloth into her bucket. The water had long since turned gray with filth, but Mrs. Caldwell's rules were absolute. 1 bucket per floor, no exceptions, no matter how many rooms that floor contained. Amber had learned not to question. Questions earned backhands. Questions earned doubled workloads. Questions earned threats about deportation, about police, about things that could happen to a young black woman alone in a city that chewed up the vulnerable and spat out the bones. She'd been working for 15 hours straight. 15 hours without food because she'd been late to the pre-dawn staff meeting, 2 minutes late, after spending the night nursing her sick roommate, and Mrs. Caldwell had deemed that worthy of punishment. No breakfast, no lunch, no dinner, just water from the bathroom tap when no one was watching, gulped down in desperate mouthfuls between the endless parade of tasks designed to break her. Polish the ballroom floor, by hand, all 3,000 square feet. Scrub the limestone fireplace in the library, with a toothbrush. Wash every window on the 3rd floor, inside and out. The scaffolding had been unavailable, so she'd leaned out over dizzying drops, clinging to window frames with fingers that had long since lost feeling. Amber knew what this was. This wasn't housekeeping. This was elimination. Mrs. Genevieve Caldwell, head housekeeper of the Thornton estate for 27 years, had made her intentions crystal clear from the moment Amber had arrived 6 weeks ago. "We don't need your kind here," she'd whispered during the initial orientation, her voice dripping with venom disguised as honey. "Mr. Thornton may have some misguided ideas about diversity hearing, but I run this house, and I don't keep what doesn't belong." What didn't belong, apparently, was a 24-year-old black woman with a bachelor's degree in art history, 3 years of hotel management experience, and the misfortune of desperately needing a job when her previous employer had shuttered without paying final paychecks. Amber had responded to the Thornton estate posting because the salary was double industry standard. She'd later learn why, and because she'd foolishly believed that working for one of San Francisco's wealthiest families might offer stability. Instead, she'd found herself in a gilded prison run by a racist tyrant, with absolute authority and zero oversight. The other staff members, all white, all hired during Mrs. Caldwell's reign, had learned long ago that survival meant complicity. They averted their eyes when Amber stumbled past carrying loads meant for 3 people. They turned deaf ears to Mrs. Caldwell's venomous comments about lazy minorities and affirmative action mistakes. They'd watched in silence as the workload intensified, the punishments escalated, the basic dignity eroded day by day. Amber had lasted longer than the previous 5 diversity hires. Mrs. Caldwell had systematically destroyed. She'd lasted because she was stubborn, because she was desperate, because going home, back to the poverty and violence she'd clawed her way out of, felt like a death worse than this slow crucifixion by Lysol and marble dust. But tonight, her body had reached its absolute limit. The grand staircase stretched before her like a mountain she no longer had the strength to climb. 23 steps of hand-carved mahogany with brass inlays that required individual polishing. Each step, each inlay, before 1 a.m. because Mrs. Caldwell would inspect at dawn, and any imperfection would mean starting over. Amber gripped the banister and pulled herself up the first step. The bucket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her vision tunneled. The ornate wallpaper, custom French silk that cost more per square foot than her monthly rent, seemed to ripple and breathe. Second step, third step, her knees buckled. She caught herself on the railing, breathing hard, tasting copper. When had she bitten her tongue? She couldn't remember. The hours had blurred into an endless loop of pain and exhaustion, and the desperate mantra that kept her moving, just finish, just survive, Tomorrow might be better. Tomorrow was never better. Fourth step, fifth step. The bucket handle bit into her palm, drawing fresh blood from old wounds. She didn't feel it anymore. Didn't feel much of anything except the growing certainty that something fundamental was breaking inside her. Not just her body had broken days ago. Something deeper, something essential. Sixth step. Seventh step. The paintings lining the stairwell watched her struggle with the indifferent eyes of long-dead Thornton ancestors. Oil portraits of stern men and elegant women who'd built fortunes on railroad money and real estate, who'd never scrubbed a floor or known hunger, who'd never been reduced to this animal state of pure survival. Eighth step, ninth step. Her heart hammered arrhythmically, too fast then too slow, skipping beats, warning her. She ignored the warnings. She'd been ignoring her body's warnings for weeks. 10th step. 11th step. The chandelier overhead, Austrian crystal, 30 feet above, worth more than Amber would earn in 5 years, began to spin lazily. Or maybe that was her. Maybe she was the one spinning, tilting, losing her grip on vertical and horizontal. 12th step, 13th. Her foot missed the step entirely. Time fractured into crystalline shards of hyper-awareness. She felt herself pitching forward, the bucket flying from her hand, cleaning solution arcing through the air in a perfect, terrible parabola. She saw her life flash before her eyes, not the cliché movie version, but the real thing. Her mother's face twisted in rage and high, her sister's small hand in hers as they ran from the latest boyfriend, the scholarship letter that had saved her, the diploma earned through midnight study sessions and day jobs, the dreams she'd carried like fragile birds all the way to this gleaming cage where they'd been systematically crushed. She was going to die on this staircase. Die in a stranger's house, unmourned and unremarked, just another disposable body in a system designed to consume the vulnerable. The marble floor rushed up to meet her face, and Amber's last conscious thought was a bitter prayer. Please let it be quick. Then the world jerked sideways. Strong arms caught her mid-fall, impossibly fast, cradling her against a broad chest that smelled of cedar and expensive cologne. Her head lolled against solid muscle. Somewhere distant, she heard her bucket clatter on marble, heard running footsteps, heard a man's voice, deep, shocked, furious, saying words she couldn't quite process. What the hell? Get the doctor now. Someone explain to me. Amber forced her eyes open, just a fraction, just enough to see the face hovering above hers. Maxwell Thornton. She'd only glimpsed him twice in 6 weeks, once during initial hearing in his office, when he'd seemed distracted and disinterested, and once crossing the foyer in an impeccable suit while she'd been scrubbing baseboards with her face to the floor. The billionaire owner of Thornton Enterprises, venture capitalist, tech investor, the man whose wealth could buy and sell entire neighborhoods. The man whose house was slowly killing her. Up close, he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 40, with steel-gray eyes that were currently wide with something between horror and rage. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples, a jaw that looked carved from the same marble she'd been polishing. And an expression that made absolutely no sense. He looked devastated. You're burning up, he said, his hand against her forehead and his voice cracked. How long when did you last eat? The question was so absurd, so impossibly removed from her reality that Amber would have laughed if she'd had the strength. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had lost meaning somewhere between starvation and torture. I'm sorry, she managed to whisper, because apologizing was reflex now, because existence itself felt like an offense she had to atone for. The stairs. I'll clean. Stop talking, stop, his arms tightened around her. You weigh nothing, my God, you're all bones. More footsteps thundered down from the upper floors. Mrs. Caldwell's voice, sharp and false sweet. Mr. Thornton, what's happened? I heard. Oh, clumsy girl, I've warned her about rushing. Be quiet. Amber had never heard 2 words carry such absolute authority, such cold, diamond-hard rage. Mrs. Caldwell's voice cut off mid-sentence like a severed wire. Maxwell Thornton rose to his full height, well over 6 feet, still cradling Amber against his chest as if she weighed nothing. When he spoke again, his voice could have frozen oceans. Mrs. Caldwell, how long has this employee been working today? Silent, terrible stretching silence. I asked you a question. I believe she started at her usual time, sir, 7 a.m. It's now 12:47 a.m. That's nearly 18 hours. Sir, I'm sure there's been some confusion. When did she last eat? More silence. Amber felt consciousness slipping again, felt the darkness pulling at her, but she fought it because she needed to hear this. needed to witness whatever was happening in this impossible moment. "Mrs. Caldwell, when did this woman last eat?" I'm not responsible for monitoring every staff member's. "She's burning with fever. She's malnourished to the point of collapse. Her hands are bleeding. Someone explain to me right now how an employee in my household reached this condition." The gathered staff, 6 faces, maybe 7, Amber couldn't focus, shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. The code of silence held. Until a small voice, trembling, broke ranks. "She hasn't eaten in 2 days, Mr. Thornton." Maria, one of the newer housekeepers, barely 20 years old. "Mrs. Caldwell said she was being punished for lateness, and yesterday for breaking a teacup. The workload, it's been—" "That's enough, Maria," Mrs. Caldwell snapped, "spreading lies about—" "I said be quiet." Maxwell's voice was a whipcrack. Maria, continue." "I can't, sir. I'll lose my job." "You'll lose your job if you don't continue. Everyone else, you're dismissed to your quarters. Now, Maria, my office. Mrs. Caldwell, don't move a muscle." The staff scattered like startled birds. Mrs. Caldwell stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, rage, and the dawning realization that her empire was crumbling. Amber's eyes fluttered closed despite her best efforts. The last thing she heard before darkness finally claimed her was Maxwell Thornton's voice, gentle now, meant only for her. "I've got you. You're safe now. I promise you this ends tonight." Then nothing. Nothing but the strange sensation of being carried upward, away from the cold marble, away from the nightmare, into somewhere warm and impossible and completely unreal. Her last semi-conscious thought, absurd and fragmentary: billionaires aren't supposed to catch falling maids. But he had. And everything was about to change. Amber surfaced from unconsciousness in stages, like a diver ascending from crushing depths. First came sensation, softness beneath her, so profound and encompassing that her body didn't recognize it. In 6 weeks at the Thornton estate, she'd slept on a thin mattress in the servants' quarters, springs poking through fabric, the smell of industrial detergent and despair. This was different. This was Egyptian cotton and down filling. This was luxury her body had forgotten existed. Then came warmth. Not the oppressive heat of fever, though that still burned through her veins, but external warmth, layered and careful, blankets, weight without pressure, temperature regulation that spoke of thoughtfulness. Then sound, voices low and intense, arguing just beyond wherever she was. Absolutely unacceptable that this occurred under my roof. "Sir, with respect, you're never here. You travel 3 weeks out of 4. How were you supposed to know?" "That's not an excuse, Richard. That's an indictment of my negligence. I hired Caldwell. I failed to implement oversight. This woman nearly died because I was too busy acquiring companies to actually manage my own household." The voice, Maxwell's voice, was raw with something Amber's fever-addled brain struggled to identify. Guilt, rage, both. "The doctor says she'll recover, but she needs rest, proper nutrition, at least a week. She'll have a month, paid, and when she's well she'll have a choice. Stay with triple salary and guaranteed protections, or leave with 6-month severance and references that will get her hired anywhere in the city. Her choice. But first, she heals. Mr. Thornton, moving her to the East Wing guest suite is unprecedented. The staff is already talking." "Let them talk. Better yet, let them pack. I want Caldwell's full employment records, every hire she's made, every termination, every complaint filed or suspiciously absent. I want to know which of my employees are complicit and which were simply too afraid to speak. And Richard." "Sorry." "Find out everything about Amber Martinez. Everything. How she got here, what she's running from, why she stayed as long as she did. I want to understand." Footsteps receded. A door closed with a soft click that somehow conveyed finality. Then silence, and the unmistakable sense of being watched. Amber forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus gradually. Crown molding, silk wallpaper in soft cream tones, a marble fireplace with a low fire crackling, oil paintings that were probably original masters. And beside the bed, an actual 4-poster bed that belonged in a palace, Maxwell Thornton sat in a wingback chair, still in his shirt and slacks from earlier, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking like he'd aged a decade in a few hours. When he saw her eyes open, his expression transformed from brooding intensity to something almost vulnerable. "You're awake," he leaned forward, hands clasped. "How do you feel?" Amber's throat was sandpaper. She managed a croak. "Where?" "East Wing, guest suite. The doctor's been here. You have severe dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion. He set up an IV." Maxwell gestured to the stand beside the bed, where clear fluid dripped steadily into her arm. You've been out for 6 hours. 6 hours. The number seemed impossible. 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep, of not being shaken awake for another task, another punishment, another impossible demand. I need to. Amber tried to sit up and her body immediately protested. Need to work. The stairs weren't finished. Mrs. Caldwell will. Mrs. Caldwell is fired. The words hung in the air like a detonation. Fired, Maxwell repeated, his voice hard as diamond. Along with her 2 senior assistants and the head butler, all of them. Gone, escorted off the property 2 hours ago. Amber's mind struggled to process this. Mrs. Caldwell, the untouchable tyrant, the woman who'd ruled this house with absolute authority for nearly 3 decades. Gone, just like that. I don't understand. You don't need to understand, you need to rest. Maxwell stood, moving to a side table where a tray waited, soup, bread, juice, arranged with careful precision. The doctor said you should eat slowly, small amounts. Your system needs to adjust. He carried the tray over with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his 6'3" frame, setting it on the bedside table with the care someone might use handling explosives. I can feed myself, Amber said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to do anything right now except heal. Maxwell sat again, and the expression on his face, concern mixed with something darker, angrier, made Amber's chest constrict. I need you to tell me what happened, all of it. How long the abuse continued, who knew, who helped, who stayed silent. I can't, Amber whispered. If I tell you, if I cause problems. You didn't cause anything. They did. Caldwell, the others. This is on them, not you. You don't understand. I need this job. I can't afford to be blacklisted, to have references that say I'm a troublemaker. Stop. Maxwell's hand moved, almost touched hers, then pulled back as if remembering professional boundaries. Let me be very clear, you're not losing anything. You're not being blamed. And anyone who tries to damage your reputation will face legal consequences that will make their lives very difficult. I have lawyers for that. Many lawyers. Despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the surreal impossibility of this situation, Amber felt a laugh bubble up. You're going to sick lawyers on people for me. And private investigators, and possibly federal regulators depending on what we uncover. Maxwell's expression was dead serious. What Caldwell did to you wasn't just cruel, it was likely criminal. Labor law violations, workplace discrimination, possibly theft if she was falsifying time cards or skimming wages. I want everything documented. Why? The question came out smaller than Amber intended. Why do you care? You don't know me, I'm just... Don't. His voice was sharp. Don't finish that sentence by diminishing yourself. You're not just anything. You're a human being who was tortured in my house under my roof while I was too blind and absent to see it. The guilt in his voice was palpable, and it stunned Amber into silence. Maxwell stood again, packing to the fireplace, his shoulders tight with tension. When he spoke again, his back was to her, his voice low. I built Thornton Enterprises from a $5 million inheritance into a $3 billion empire. I can tell you the quarterly earnings of every company in my portfolio. I can predict market trends 6 months out. I can negotiate billion-dollar deals in 3 languages. He turned to face her, and his eyes were haunted. But I couldn't see that the woman managing my own home was a monster. I couldn't protect the people in my own household. What does that say about me? It says you're human, Amber said quietly. It says you trusted the wrong person. That's not the same as being complicit. Isn't it? Maxwell moved back to the chair, and this time he did take her hand carefully as if she might shatter. I'm going to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. No fear of consequences. Can you do that? Amber nodded, though fear still coiled in her gut like a living thing. Did you stay because you had nowhere else to go? The question pierced straight through her defenses. Amber felt tears prick her eyes, the first tears she'd allowed herself in weeks, because crying was weakness and weakness was punished. I stayed because the alternative was worse, she whispered. I stayed because going back to where I came from felt like dying. I stayed because I thought if I could just survive long enough, prove myself strong enough, it would get better. A bitter laugh escaped. It never got better. Maxwell's jaw clenched. Where did you come from? And because something about this moment felt like confession, like safety in the eye of a hurricane, Amber told him. She told him about growing up in Oakland, about a mother lost to addiction and a revolving door of violent men, about raising her younger sister alone from age 14, working under-the-table jobs while hiding their situation from social services, about the guidance counselor who'd seen something in her, who'd helped her apply for scholarships, who believed she deserved more than survival. She told him about the full ride to UC Berkeley, about studying art history while working 3 jobs, about graduating summa cum laude with big dreams and crushing student debt, about the hotel management position that had seemed perfect until the company folded overnight, leaving her unemployed with rent due and no safety net. She told him about the Thornton estate posting, about the salary that seemed too good to be true, because it was, and about arriving to find Mrs. Caldwell waiting like a spider in a web. She knew I was desperate, Amber said, her voice hollow. She could smell it on me, and she knew that meant she could do anything she wanted because where was I going to go? Who was I going to tell? I had no leverage, no power. I was exactly what she wanted, disposable. By the time she finished, Maxwell's hand was clenched so tightly around hers that it should have hurt. His face was a mask of cold fury. "She's not getting away with this," he said quietly. "I promise you that." "You can't promise that. People like her always get away with it." "Not this time." Maxwell released her hand gently, standing with the decisive movement of a man who just made an irrevocable decision. "Rest now, eat, sleep. Tomorrow, Richard, my estate manager, will take your full statement. We're documenting everything, building a case." "A case for what?" "Justice." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression Amber couldn't quite read. "One more thing. That first day you were hired when you came to my office, do you remember it?" "Barely. You seemed busy, distracted." "I was. Too busy to conduct a proper interview, too distracted to notice that you were overqualified for the position, too self-absorbed to ask why someone with your credentials was applying for housekeeping." His voice was thick with self-recrimination. "I failed you before you even started. I'm sorry." "Mr. Thornton." "Maxwell, please." The intimacy of the request sent a strange flutter through Amber's chest. "Maxwell, you didn't fail me. The system failed me. You're the first person in a long time who's tried to help." Something complicated crossed his face. Gratitude mixed with pain, mixed with something else Amber couldn't identify. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Ring the bell if you need anything, anything at all. I'll be down the hall. You're staying on this floor. Someone needs to make sure you're safe, that you're cared for." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, I don't sleep much anyway. Consider me your personal security guard for the duration." Before Amber could process the absurdity of a billionaire serving as her bodyguard, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. She lay in the magnificent bed, IV dripping, soup cooling on the bedside table, and tried to make sense of the last 6 hours. Her body ached, her heart raced, her mind spun with possibilities and impossibilities. Mrs. Caldwell was gone, the nightmare was over. Or was it? Because as Amber's hand drifted to her stomach, to the secret she'd been hiding under baggy uniforms and strategic layering, she knew the truth. The nightmare was just beginning. 3 months pregnant, no father in the picture, no family to turn to, and now somehow in the care of a man whose world was so far removed from hers that they might as well be different species. What happened next? Amber closed her eyes, exhaustion pulling her under despite the storm of thoughts. But just before sleep claimed her, she could have sworn she heard Maxwell's voice through the door, low and intense, speaking to someone on the phone. "I don't care what it costs. Find everything. Every employee she's destroyed, every complaint she's buried, every regulation she's violated. And while you're at it, I want a full investigation into the previous housekeeping hires. Because if I'm right about this pattern..." The words faded as sleep dragged her down. But one phrase echoed in her dreams. "If I'm right about this pattern." What pattern? What had Maxwell seen that Amber had missed? The answers would come soon enough. And they would shatter everything she thought she knew about her own story. Amber woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of fresh coffee. For a disorienting moment, she thought she'd died and gone to some improbable heaven where exhausted maids got silk sheets and breakfast on silver trays. Then she remembered this was real, all of it. The knock on the door was soft, respectful. "Miss Martinez, are you awake?" Not Maxwell's voice, someone older, professional. "Yes," Amber managed, struggling to sit up. The IV had been removed at some point while she'd slept. How long had she been out? And her body, while still weak, felt almost human again. The door opened to reveal a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit carrying a tray that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. "Good morning. I'm Richard Calloway, estate manager. Mr. Thornton asked me to bring breakfast and when you're ready to take your statement." He set the tray on the bedside table with practiced efficiency. "But please, take your time. There's no rush." Amber stared at the tray, Fluffy scrambled eggs, toast with jam, fresh fruit arranged artfully, orange juice, and that glorious coffee. Real food. Abundant food. Food she hadn't had to beg for or earn through suffering. Her eyes filled with tears, which was ridiculous, but she couldn't help it. "Miss Martinez," Richard's voice was gentle, "are you all right?" "I'm sorry," she whispered, swiping at her eyes. "It's just, this is more food than I've seen in 6 weeks." Richard's expression darkened. "Yes, well, that's part of what we need to discuss, but first please eat, doctor's orders." Amber ate slowly, savoring every bite, while Richard sat in the wingback chair and made polite small talk about the weather, the gardens, anything to put her at ease. It worked mostly. By the time she'd finished, some of her strength had returned. "I understand this may be difficult," Richard said, pulling out a tablet, "but I need you to walk me through your entire employment here. Every incident, every punishment, every irregularity. We're building a comprehensive case." So Amber told him everything. The story poured out easier than she'd expected, maybe because Richard's face remained professionally neutral, never showing shock or disbelief, just taking notes with methodical precision. She told him about the starvation punishments, the impossible workloads, the racist comments disguised as concerns about cultural fit, the other staff members who'd been fired or driven to quit under similar circumstances. "How many others?" Richard asked. "How many people left before you arrived?" Mrs. Caldwell mentioned 5 in the past year. She called them failures who couldn't handle the standards. Richard's fingers flew across the tablet. And did these 5 people share any characteristics? Amber understood what he was really asking. They were all minorities. 2 black women like me, 1 Latina, 1 Asian woman, 1 Middle Eastern man. Mrs. Caldwell had a very specific idea of what the Thornton estate staff should look like. And that idea was white. "Yes." Richard nodded grimly. "That aligns with what we've uncovered. Mrs. Caldwell's hearing records show a stark pattern. Before Mr. Thornton implemented diversity requirements 2 years ago, the entire staff was white. After the requirements, she hired exactly enough minorities to avoid legal issues, then systematically drove them out through abuse while documenting performance failures to justify the terminations. The calculated cruelty of it made Amber's stomach turn. She had a system. A very effective one, unfortunately, until you. What was different about me? You lasted longer than the others. 6 weeks versus an average of 2. You were more stubborn, more desperate, more willing to endure, which meant you were here when Mr. Thornton finally came home and saw what was happening." Before Amber could respond, the door opened and Maxwell strode in, looking like he'd been awake for days despite the early hour. His eyes went immediately to Amber, assessing, ensuring she was all right before turning to Richard. "How much have you told her?" "Just the hearing patterns, not the rest." "The rest?" Amber looked between them. "What rest?" Maxwell pulled over a second chair, sitting so he was eye level with her. "We've been investigating all night. What we've found goes beyond discrimination and abuse." He nodded to Richard, who pulled up a spreadsheet on his tablet and turned it so Amber could see. Rows and rows of numbers, dates, transactions. Mrs. Caldwell had been embezzling from the household accounts for 15 years, Richard explained. Small amounts at first, a few $100s here and there, disguised as supply purchases or maintenance costs, but in recent years it escalated. She was stealing approximately $40,000 per year. Amber's jaw dropped. "How?" "Fake vendors, inflated invoices, ghost employees on the payroll," Maxwell said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She'd create paper trails for services never rendered, supplies never delivered. And because I was rarely here, because I trusted her completely, because the amount seemed reasonable in the context of running an estate this size, no one caught it. Until now. Until we started actually looking." Maxwell leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But that's not the worst part. Amber, how much were you being paid?" She quoted the salary from her hearing letter, the amount that had seemed generous enough to risk the position. Maxwell's expression went absolutely glacial. "You should have been making triple that. The job posting Richard filed, the one I approved, listed a significantly higher salary. Caldwell adjusted the numbers on your actual contract and pocketed the difference. She did this to every minority hire, gave them lower salaries than white staff in equivalent positions, then documented them as making standard rates. She was stealing from you and 15 years of employees before you." The violation of it, not just the abuse but the theft, the systematic dehumanization, hit Amber like a physical blow. She took everything. She took what she could, but we're getting it back. Maxwell's hand moved like he wanted to reach for hers again but stopped himself. Every penny she stole from you and the others. I've already instructed my attorneys to file criminal charges. She'll face prosecution for embezzlement, fraud, labor violations, and discrimination. She'll deny it all. She already has. I confronted her last night before her termination. Maxwell's smile was sharp as broken glass. She called it creative accounting and maintaining household standards. She claimed you and the others were simply not suited for the position. Then she made the mistake of threatening a lawsuit for wrongful termination. What did you do? I showed her the forensic accounting report and the statements from 3 other former employees who have agreed to testify about identical treatment, and the security footage. Amber's head snapped up. Security footage. Richard cleared his throat. The estate has comprehensive security cameras. Mrs. Caldwell knew about the exterior cameras, but was unaware that Mr. Thornton had also installed interior cameras in the main corridors 5 years ago after a theft incident. Cameras that have been recording everything. We have you collapsing on the stairs, Maxwell said quietly. We have you working 18-hour shifts. We have footage of Caldwell berating you, of her assigning impossible tasks, of her denying you breaks and meals. We have everything, Amber, and it's all time-stamped, dated, undeniable. The room seemed to tilt. You watched me. I watched you be tortured in my own house while I was off making money I don't need. Maxwell's voice cracked. I watched 6 weeks of systematic abuse condensed into a 12-hour review, and I have never been more disgusted with myself in my entire life. Mr. Thornton, Richard said quietly, a warning. No, Maxwell stood abruptly, packing to the window. She deserves the truth, all of it. What truth? Amber demanded, fear spiking. What aren't you telling me? Maxwell turned from the window, and the devastation in his eyes made Amber's breath catch. The investigation into previous hires didn't just reveal a pattern of abuse, it revealed something else, something that connects to you specifically. He pulled out his phone, pulled up a photo, handed it to her. This was the first diversity hire Mrs. Caldwell destroyed, 7 years ago. Does she look familiar? Amber stared at the photo. A young black woman, maybe 19, with bright eyes and a hopeful smile, and felt the world drop away beneath her. No, she whispered, that's impossible. But it wasn't impossible, because Amber knew that face. Knew it because she'd seen it every day for 14 years. Knew it because she'd held that hand through nightmares. Knew it because she'd raised that girl after their mother had abandoned them both. The woman in the photo was her sister, Jasmine. She worked here. Amber's voice sounded strangled. Jasmine worked here. For 3 weeks, Maxwell said gently. 7 years ago, before you had graduated college. According to the records, she was fired for repeated performance failures and insubordination. That's a lie. Jasmine was brilliant. She was organized, hardworking. She never, Amber stopped, realization crashing over her like a tidal wave. She never told me. She never said she worked here. Did she tell you why she left San Francisco 7 years ago? Amber's mind raced back. Jasmine had been 19, had gotten a job through a placement agency, had seemed excited about the opportunity. Then, 3 weeks later, she'd shown up at Amber's apartment devastated, destroyed, saying the job hadn't worked out and she needed to leave the city. She'd moved to Portland, cut off most contact, struggled with depression that Amber hadn't understood. She said she'd had a bad experience, wouldn't talk about it, I thought. Amber's hands trembled. I thought maybe she'd been assaulted. She exhibited all the signs, trauma, withdrawal, self-blame. But she refused to discuss it, and I was still in school. I couldn't help her the way I should have. She was assaulted, Maxwell said, his voice hard. Psychologically, the same way you were. Mrs. Caldwell destroyed her, then sent her away with a reference so poisonous that she couldn't get hired anywhere decent in the hospitality industry. We found the reference letter in the files. It's a masterpiece of professional assassination, subtle enough to avoid defamation claims, damning enough to ensure she'd never work in a quality establishment again. Amber felt like she was free-falling. So when I applied here, when I used my professional credentials, my different last name, Caldwell didn't make the connection until after you were hired. But once you arrived, once she saw your face, Richard pulled up another document. We found emails. She knew exactly who you were within the first week, and she was thrilled. The email was pulled up on the tablet, dated 3 days after Amber's arrival. The new hire is the sister. Recognized her immediately, same eyes, same stubborn streak. This one won't break as easily as the first, which means it will be even more satisfying when she does. 2 for 2. A complete set. Amber's vision blurred. She tortured me because of Jasmine. She tortured you because she's a sadistic racist who got off on destroying people she considered beneath her, Maxwell corrected, his voice vibrating with fury. Your sister was an excuse. You would have been a target regardless. But yes, the connection made it personal for her. A game. I need to call Jasmine. Amber tried to stand and her legs nearly gave out. Maxwell was there instantly, steadying her. I need to tell her I need to. We've already contacted her, Richard said gently. Last night. She's flying in this afternoon. We've arranged everything, first-class ticket, hotel, transportation. She'll be here by evening. The kindness of it, the sheer, overwhelming thoughtfulness, broke something in Amber. She sagged against Maxwell, and this time he didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her fully, supporting her weight, letting her cry against his chest while 7 years of confusion and guilt and pain poured out. I didn't protect her, Amber sobbed. I didn't know I should have known. You couldn't have known, Maxwell said firmly, his hand gentle on her back. Caldwell was an expert at hiding her crimes, at making her victims blame themselves. None of this, not what happened to Jasmine, not what happened to you, none of it is your fault. But if I'd pushed harder, if I'd made her talk, then Caldwell would have added interfering family to her list of reasons to blacklist you both. Richard's voice was kind but firm. You did what you could with the information you had. Now we do better. Now we fight back. Amber pulled back, swiping at her eyes. How? Maxwell's expression was pure steel. We destroy her, legally, professionally, financially. We make sure she never has the power to hurt anyone again, and we make sure every single person she's harmed gets justice, compensation, vindication. That's going to be expensive. I'm a billionaire, expensive is relative. His smile was grim. Besides, I consider it an investment in correcting my own negligence. I allowed this to happen. I'm going to make it right. Over the next hour, they laid out the plan. Criminal charges filed with the DA, civil suits from Amber and the other victims, full forensic audits of the household accounts, and a complete restructuring of the estate's management and oversight. Maxwell was bringing in an outside firm to review all HR practices, implementing new protections, establishing anonymous reporting systems. The trial will be public, Richard warned Amber. Your name, your sister's name, everything that happened, it'll be in the news. Thornton is a high-profile family. This will be a media circus. I don't care, Amber said, and was surprised to find she meant it. If it stops her from doing this to someone else, I'll testify 1,000 times. Maxwell's eyes held something that looked like admiration. You're remarkable, you know that. Amber laughed, the sound still watery but genuine. I'm a mess. You're a survivor, there's a difference. Before Amber could respond, Richard's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression shifted. Sir, there's a situation. Mrs. Caldwell has retained Marcus Brennan as counsel. Maxwell's jaw tightened. Of course she has. Who's Marcus Brennan? Amber asked. The most expensive, most ruthless defense attorney in California, Maxwell said. He specializes in defending the indefensible and winning through technicalities and character assassination. If Caldwell's hired him, she's preparing for total war. Can we beat him? We have evidence, witnesses, and the truth. Maxwell's smile was sharp. And I have resources he's never faced before, so yes, we can beat him. Richard stood. I'll prepare the response to their initial filing. Miss Martinez, I'll need you to meet with our legal team this afternoon to go over your testimony, if you're feeling up to it. I am. After Richard left, Amber and Maxwell sat in silence for a moment. The weight of everything, the revelations, the upcoming battle, the impossible kindness this stranger was showing her, pressed down like a physical force. Why are you doing this? Amber asked quietly. Really doing this? You could settle quietly, make this go away with an NDA and a check. Why risk the publicity, the expense, the hassle? Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. 23 years ago, my mother hired a new housekeeper. Young woman, immigrant, desperate for work. Her name was Rosa. He stared at his hands. My father was traveling, I was away at college. Rosa worked for us for 8 months. And in that time, our head of staff, a woman not unlike Mrs. Caldwell, made her life a living hell. Exactly the same pattern, impossible workloads, verbal abuse, systematic destruction. What happened to her? She killed herself. Maxwell's voice broke. Hung herself in the servants' quarters. Left a note detailing everything, but the staff buried it. Said it was an unfortunate tragedy, mental instability, nothing to do with the household. And my parents, who were good people, who would have been horrified, never knew the truth because I never told them. Amber's heart clenched. You knew. I found the real note. Years later, cleaning out my mother's estate after she died, found it hidden in the head of staff's belongings that had been archived. I was 35 years old, and I realized I could have prevented a death if I just paid attention, if I just cared about the people working in my own home. He looked at Amber, and his eyes were haunted. I swore I'd never let it happen again. And then I got busy, got distracted, got too focused on building empires to maintain the one I lived in. And history repeated itself. I'm not dead, Amber said softly. You almost were, on my staircase, in my house. Maxwell's hand found hers, squeezed gently. I won't make the same mistake twice. This isn't about money or reputation or even justice, though all of those matter. This is about making sure Rosa's death meant something. Making sure you and Jasmine and everyone Caldwell hurt know that they mattered, that they were seen. Amber squeezed back, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Besides, Maxwell said, his tone lightening just slightly, destroying corrupt bullies is actually very satisfying. I've built a career on it. This is just more personal. Thank you, Amber whispered, for seeing me, for caring, for all of it. Thank you for surviving, Maxwell replied, and for being brave enough to stay alive until someone finally noticed. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Amber's stomach growled loudly, breaking the tension. Maxwell laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. Right, more food and rest. The war begins tomorrow, today you heal. As he stood to leave, Amber called after him, Maxwell. He turned back. What you're doing, it won't bring Rosa back, but it matters, it means something. His smile was sad and grateful all at once. Good, because I'm just getting started. After he left, Amber lay back against the pillows, her mind spinning. In less than 24 hours, her entire world had been dismantled and rebuilt. The nightmare was over. Justice was coming. Her sister would arrive soon. And somehow, impossibly, the cold billionaire who'd caught her before she hit the ground was becoming something she never expected. An ally, a protector, maybe even a friend. The future was uncertain. The battle ahead would be brutal, but for the first time in 6 weeks, in 7 years, if she was honest, Amber felt something fragile and precious unfurling in her chest. Hope. The courtroom was exactly as imposing as Amber had feared. All dark wood and marble, high ceilings that swallowed sound, and a gallery packed with reporters, legal observers, and faces she recognized from the Thornton estate. 3 months had passed since that night on the staircase, 3 months of depositions and legal preparations and slow, careful healing. Now, finally, the reckoning had arrived. Amber sat in the witness box, her hands folded to hide their trembling, and faced Marcus Brennan's predatory smile. Miss Martinez, he began, his voice smooth as poisoned honey, you claim you endured terrible abuse at the Thornton estate, yet you stayed for 6 weeks. Why didn't you simply quit? Because I needed the job to survive. Survive? Brennan's eyebrows rose. Isn't it true you have a bachelor's degree, professional experience, you could have found employment elsewhere? I tried, the market was. Isn't it true, Brennan interrupted, that you were actually fired from your previous position for theft? The courtroom erupted. Maxwell's lead attorney, Diana Chen, was on her feet instantly. Objection. That's a complete fabrication with no basis in. Withdrawn, Brennan said smoothly, the damage already done, the lie planted in the jury's minds. Amber's heart raced, but she forced herself to breathe, to remember Diana's coaching. Stay calm. Tell the truth. Don't let him rattle you. I was never fired for theft, Amber said clearly. My previous employer went bankrupt. The payroll company absconded with 3 weeks of wages owed to all employees. That's public record. Brennan smiled like she'd walked into a trap. So you were desperate for money. Desperate enough, perhaps, to fabricate claims of abuse when you realized how wealthy your employer was. Desperate enough to see an opportunity for a lawsuit. No. No, yet here we are. You're suing Mrs. Caldwell and Mr. Thornton's estate for $3 million. I'm suing for back wages, medical expenses, and compensation for documented abuse. The amount was calculated by $3 million is quite a windfall for someone who claims to just want justice. Diana objected again, but Amber had heard enough. Something inside her, forged in 6 weeks of hell and 3 months of rebuilding, snapped into diamond-hard clarity. Mr. Brennan, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom noise, I didn't ask for money. I asked for Mrs. Caldwell to never be able to do this to anyone else. Mr. Thornton insisted on compensation, because unlike your client who stole from employees for 15 years, some people actually believe in making amends. The gallery murmured. Brennan's smile tightened. "Speaking of Mr. Thornton," he said, pivoting, "isn't it true you're currently living in his estate, in a guest suite far above your station? I'm recovering from malnutrition and exhaustion. Isn't it true you've been seen in restaurants with Mr. Thornton? That he's paid for your medical care, your sister's relocation to San Francisco, even your law school application fees?" Amber's cheeks flushed, but she held Brennan's gaze. "Mr. Thornton has been generous to all of Mrs. Caldwell's victims, not just me. He's—" "How convenient," Brennan cut in, "that you found such a wealthy benefactor. Some might call it a modern Cinderella story, a poor maid catching the eye of a billionaire prince." "Enough." The voice cracked through the courtroom like thunder. Maxwell Thornton stood in the gallery, his face a mask of cold fury, and even the judge seemed stunned into silence. "Your Honor," Diana said quickly, "I apologize for the outburst, but I'd like to request a brief recess." The judge, looking between Maxwell's rigid form and Brennan's smug expression, nodded. 15 minutes. In the private conference room, Maxwell paced like a caged panther. "He's making this about us, about some fabricated relationship that doesn't exist. He's trying to destroy your credibility by implying I'm sleeping with you for money," Amber finished calmly. "I know. It's disgusting, it's misogynistic, it's exactly what Diana said he'd do." Amber leaned against the conference table, her initial fear replaced by determination. "He has no defense against the evidence. The security footage, the financial records, the other victims' testimonies, it's all ironclad. So he's attacking my character instead, making the jury see me as a gold digger instead of a victim." Maxwell stopped packing, his hands clenched. "I should never have insisted on the compensation. I should have realized it would be used against you." "You insisted on it because it was right," Amber said firmly. "Because I deserve it, we all do." Diana looked between them, her expression thoughtful. "There is one way to neutralize this line of attack completely." "How?" Maxwell demanded. "Tell the truth, all of it." Amber's stomach dropped. "Diana, we agreed." "I know what we agreed, but Brennan's not going to stop. He'll insinuate, imply, suggest until the jury sees exactly what he wants them to see, unless we take that power away from him." "By telling them what?" Maxwell asked. Diana looked at Amber. "By explaining why Maxwell's support has been so personal, by putting the real story on record." Amber's hand drifted unconsciously to her stomach, still flat but hiding a truth that was growing harder to conceal. 4 months along now. Soon it would be obvious. "No," Maxwell said immediately. "Absolutely not. That's private, that's—" "That's the truth," Amber interrupted quietly. "That I'm pregnant. That the father was an abusive ex who I left before I even knew. That I was terrified and alone when I took this job. That I was trying to build a life for a baby I didn't know how to provide for." Maxwell's expression cracked. "Amber, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't, Brennan will find out eventually and use it to paint an even worse picture. Pregnant single mother entraps billionaire. He'd have a field day. We could suppress it. Medical privacy would last about 5 minutes once I start showing." Amber took a deep breath. "Diana's right. We control the narrative or Brennan does. Those are the options." The silence stretched taut. Finally Maxwell nodded. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." When they returned to the courtroom, Diana requested permission to redirect. The judge, looking weary of Brennan's theatrics, allowed it. "Miss Martinez," Diana said gently, "Mr. Brennan has suggested that your relationship with Maxwell Thornton is somehow improper or opportunistic. Can you clarify the nature of that relationship?" Amber took a deep breath. In the gallery, she found Jasmine's face. Her sister had flown in for every day of the trial, and drew strength from her encouraging nod. "Maxwell Thornton saved my life," Amber said clearly. "Literally. When I collapsed, he caught me. When I had no one, he made sure I was cared for. He did the same for my sister, who Mrs. Caldwell had previously destroyed. He did the same for 5 other victims we've identified. He's acted as a benefactor, not because there's anything romantic between us, but because he's trying to correct a wrong that happened on his watch." "And why do you think his support has been so personal?" Diana prompted. "Because he understands what it's like to lose someone to this kind of abuse. And because—" Amber paused, then committed fully. "Because when he found me, I wasn't just malnourished and exhausted. I was also 4 weeks pregnant, terrified, and trying to figure out how to survive long enough to give my child a chance at life." The courtroom exploded. Brennan shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is clearly a ploy for sympathy." "This is medical fact, Your Honor," Diana cut in, producing documents. "Documented by 3 separate physicians. Miss Martinez was pregnant during her employment, a fact she disclosed to Mrs. Caldwell when requesting lighter lifting duties, a request that was denied and used to justify even harsher work assignments. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression darkening. Mrs. Caldwell knowingly assigned intensive physical labor to a pregnant employee. Yes, Your Honor. We have emails where Miss Martinez requested accommodation and was told she'd be fired if she couldn't handle basic tasks. Amber watched Mrs. Caldwell's face go pale. They'd hidden this evidence, saved it for exactly this moment, and now the full horror of it was landing. She what? One of the jurors, an older woman, looked physically ill. Diana pressed the advantage. Mrs. Caldwell didn't just abuse Miss Martinez. She endangered an unborn child out of spite. And when Mr. Thornton discovered this, after the collapse, during the medical examination, his response was to ensure Amber had access to proper prenatal care. That's not romance, Mr. Brennan. That's basic human decency. Brennan tried to recover, tried to spin it, but the damage was done. The jury's faces told the story. Whatever sympathy they might have had for Mrs. Caldwell had evaporated. The trial continued for 3 more days, but the outcome was never in doubt after that moment. Witness after witness testified. The other victims, former staff members who'd stayed silent out of fear, financial experts who laid out the embezzlement in damning detail. The security footage played on loop. Amber working impossible hours, collapsing, being caught by Maxwell, the genuine horror on his face as he realized what had been happening. Mrs. Caldwell's defense crumbled. Brennan's tricks and tactics couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, labor law violations, discrimination, reckless endangerment. The civil judgment was even more decisive. $4.7 million to be split among 7 victims, with Amber receiving the largest share due to the severity and duration of her abuse. Mrs. Caldwell's assets were frozen, her professional certifications revoked, her reputation destroyed. But the real victory came in the judge's closing statement. Mrs. Caldwell, you held a position of trust and authority, and you used it to systematically destroy vulnerable people who dared to seek employment in a household you considered your personal kingdom. You stole their wages, their dignity, their health. You endangered a pregnant woman and an unborn child out of pure malice. Your actions represent the very worst of what happens when power goes unchecked and prejudice goes unpunished. I'm recommending the maximum sentence on all counts to be served consecutively. Bailiff, remand the defendant into custody. As Mrs. Caldwell was led away in handcuffs, Amber felt Jasmine's hand slip into hers. Her sister was crying, they both were. But these were tears of relief, of vindication, of wounds finally beginning to heal. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed. Maxwell's security team cleared a path, but Diana paused them at the top of the steps. Statement, she asked Amber quietly. Amber nodded, she'd prepared for this. The cameras focused, the reporters quieted. My name is Amber Martinez, she said, her voice steady and strong. For 6 weeks, I was tortured in one of San Francisco's most prestigious homes by a woman who believed my life had no value because of the color of my skin. She was wrong. My life has value. My sister's life has value. The lives of every person she destroyed have value. She paused, one hand drifting to her stomach, where her baby grew safe and protected now. Justice today doesn't erase what happened, but it sends a message. Abuse of power has consequences. Cruelty has consequences. And when those consequences finally catch up, when the truth finally comes out, no amount of money or influence or expensive lawyers can protect you. Miss Martinez, a reporter called, what's next for you? Amber smiled, genuine and free. I start law school in the fall, family law, workers' rights, and in 4 months I become a mother, so I guess what's next is everything. More questions flew, but Maxwell's security ushered them to the waiting car. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the vehicle, Amber finally let herself collapse. You were amazing, Jasmine said, squeezing her hand. Both of you. Because Maxwell sat across from them, and he'd been there every day of the trial, every deposition, every difficult moment. Not as a billionaire benefactor, but as something more complicated and more real. Thank you, Amber said to him quietly, for everything. Maxwell's expression was soft. You did this. You survived. You fought. I just made sure you had the resources to win. You did more than that. The car pulled up to the Thornton estate, the place that had been hell, then hospital, then slowly, impossibly, home. The staff that greeted them were new faces, hired through a rigorous process that Maxwell had personally overseen, with protections and oversight that ensured no one could abuse power the way Caldwell had. They'd offered Amber a position, senior household manager, with full autonomy and a salary that made her earlier pay seem like an insult. She'd accepted, not because she needed to stay, but because reclaiming this space, transforming it from a site of trauma to a site of healing, felt like its own form of justice. That evening, after Jasmine had gone to her guest room and the estate had settled into quiet, Amber found Maxwell in his study, staring at the fire. "Can't sleep?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, smiled, thinking. About how different things could have been, if I'd paid attention sooner, if I'd been here. Amber moved into the room, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You can't rewrite the past." "No, but I can learn from it." Maxwell leaned back. "I'm restructuring everything. Thornton Enterprises, the household staff, all of it. Implementing oversight, accountability, protections. Making sure this never happens again." "That's good." "It's not enough, but it's a start." He studied her face. "What about you? Law school, motherhood, that's a lot to take on." "I've taken on worse," Amber said wryly. "Besides, I'll have help. Jasmine's moving into the guest house, and you've made it clear the job comes with flexibility." "The job comes with whatever you need," Maxwell corrected. "Amber, I want you to know that you're not obligated to stay here. I'll support whatever choice you make." "I know," Amber interrupted gently. "That's why I'm choosing to stay, not because I have to, because I want to." Something shifted in Maxwell's expression. "Why?" Amber considered the question, considered the complicated truth of it, that this man had seen her at her absolute lowest and responded with compassion, that he'd fought for her when no one else would, that somewhere in the midst of legal battles and healing, they'd become friends. Real friends. And maybe, someday, something more. But that was future talk. Tonight was about the present. "Because this place doesn't own me anymore," Amber said finally. "I own it. I own my story, my recovery, my future. And I want to build that future somewhere that reminds me every day how far I've come." Maxwell nodded slowly. "Then build it, here or anywhere, whatever you need, Amber, I mean that." "I know you do, that's why it matters." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the weight of the trial finally lifting from their shoulders. Outside, San Francisco glittered in the darkness. A city of dreams and nightmares, of opportunity and exploitation, of people trying to survive, and people trying to help them do more than that. Amber's hand drifted to her stomach again, feeling the flutter of movement that had started last week. Her daughter, she'd learned that yesterday, was growing strong, fighting her way into the world the same way Amber had fought for both of them. "She's going to be fierce," Amber said softly. Maxwell looked up. "Your daughter?" "Yeah, I can already tell. She's stubborn, takes after her mother." "Then she'll be unstoppable." Maxwell's smile was warm. "The world won't know what hit it." "Good," Amber said. "The world could use a little more disruption, a little more fight." "To fighting," Maxwell raised his glass of scotch. Amber raised her sparkling water. "To fighting, and to winning." Their glasses clinked, a pact sealed, a future opening before them like an unwritten book. The nightmare was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere in the ruins of what had been, something new and beautiful and fiercely protected was growing. Justice. Hope. Home. Epilogue 6 months later. The nursery at the Thornton estate was a masterpiece of gentle colors and careful design. Soft yellows and greens, hand-painted murals of gardens and stars, a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the bay. Amber sat in that chair now, her daughter, Nora Rose Martinez, sleeping peacefully against her chest, and marveled at how dramatically life could shift. Law school had started 3 weeks ago. It was brutal, demanding, everything she'd expected. But Maxwell's lawyers offered mentorship. The estate's new staff helped with childcare. Jasmine had found work at a nonprofit and was thriving for the first time in years. And Mrs. Caldwell was serving a 12-year sentence in federal prison. The other victims had all received their settlements, their apologies, their vindication. 2 had gone on to start their own businesses. 1 was writing a book about the experience. All of them were healing. "She's beautiful." Amber looked up to find Maxwell in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. He'd made a habit of these early morning visits, bringing breakfast before he left for the office, checking in on both of them. "She is," Amber agreed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Though she kept me up half the night. I think she's going to be a trial lawyer, already arguing with everything." Maxwell laughed, settling into the second chair. With you as her mother, that's guaranteed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the bay gold and pink. The friendship between them had deepened over the months, built on trust and shared trauma, and the quiet understanding of people who'd seen each other's worst and best. I've been thinking, Maxwell said eventually, about the foundation. They'd established the Rosa Martinez Foundation, named for both Rosa, the housekeeper who died, and for Amber's middle name, to support victims of workplace abuse and discrimination. It had launched last month with an endowment of $10 million. What about it? I want you to run it, after law school obviously, but run it, lead it, make it into something that actually changes the system. Amber stared at him. Maxwell, that's the right choice. You understand the issues better than anyone, you've lived them, and you have the drive and intelligence to make a real difference. He met her eyes. Plus, it would give you the platform to do what you've always wanted, protect people, fight for them. That's a huge responsibility. You've handled worse. 6 weeks with Caldwell, law school with an infant. I think running a foundation will be relatively easy. Amber laughed, then sobered. Why do you keep doing this, giving me opportunities, believing in me? Maxwell was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Because I see what you could become, what you already are, and because, he paused, seemed to wrestle with something, then continued. Because somewhere along the way, your success stopped being about assuaging my guilt and started being about wanting to see you thrive. Because you deserve it. Because the world needs people like you in positions of power. The admission hung between them, heavier than friendship, not quite romance, but something significant and real. Thank you, Amber said softly, for seeing me, for believing, for all of it. Thank you for letting me be part of your story. Nora stirred, made a tiny sound of protest, settled again. Amber looked down at her daughter, this miracle, this fighter, this hope made flesh, and felt the last pieces of her broken self click into place. She wasn't healed. Healing took time, took work, took conscious choice every single day, but she was healing, they all were. And that was enough. That was everything. What would you have done in Amber's shoes? Would you have stayed and endured the abuse out of desperation, or would you have walked away even if it meant losing everything? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your truth, because this story is bigger than just Amber. This is about every person who's ever been exploited, discriminated against, or made to feel invisible by someone in power. This story reminds us that justice can prevail when we refuse to stay silent, when we document the abuse, when we find allies willing to fight alongside us, when we believe, even in our darkest moments, that we deserve better than survival, we deserve dignity. If this story made your blood boil, if it reminded you of your own battles with toxic workplaces, abusive bosses, or systems designed to break you, you're not alone. There are millions of us out there, fighting the same fight, carrying the same scars, refusing to be crushed by people who think power makes them untouchable. Here's what I need from you right now. Smash that like button if you believe accountability matters. If you believe that no amount of wealth or influence should protect predators. If you believe that one person's courage to speak up can create change for thousands. Comment Justice SERVAD if Amber's story resonated with you. Comment, I see you if you've been where Amber was. Comment never again if you're committed to calling out abuse whenever you witness it. Your voice matters. Your story matters. This community is built on refusing to stay silent. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because this channel is dedicated to sharing stories like Amber's, stories of people who faced impossible odds and refused to break, stories of justice delayed but not denied, stories that prove the system can work when enough people demand it. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Tag someone who's fighting their own battle right now and needs to know they're not alone. Send it to that friend who's stuck in a toxic job, wondering if speaking up will cost them everything. Let them see what's possible when we refuse to accept abuse as the price of survival. Together, we're building a community that believes in more than just watching injustice. We believe in ending it. One story at a time. One person speaking up at a time. One viewer refusing to look away at a time. The question isn't whether you'll face corruption or abuse in your life. Statistics say most of us will. The question is, when that moment comes, will you have the courage to do what Amber did? Will you document it? Will you speak up? Will you fight back? Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. They only win when we stay silent. When we accept that this is just how things are. When we believe we're powerless to change anything. But we're not powerless. We never were. Drop that like. Drop that comment, hit subscribe, and join us in the fight for a world where people like Mrs. Caldwell face consequences, people like Maxwell step up to make things right, and people like Amber don't just survive, they thrive. Justice is waiting, let's go get it. Now smash that like button, and let's change the world together.